What's up everyone, I'm Ignatius, and this is my third video in PoE 2. This video is going to cover one of the most powerful builds I think we will ever see in the game. You will learn what I find to be the most important things for understanding Lightning Spear Deadeye with Wind Serpent's Fury, and how to optimize the build and crush the game. Alright, as always, before we jump into the video, I like to give a general introduction. I'm new to PoE. I started in the Affliction League of PoE 1. I am not necessarily an expert in anything I say. I'm a potato. But when I do learn something that I think I know decently, and it seems like it would be valuable to share it with the community, I make one of these videos. So I hope you enjoy it. I stream nightly on Twitch and YouTube. I'm running a Discord server, so come on by and let's do some PoE stuff together. Okay, getting into the guide itself, I kind of want to say two things about what type of guide this is and what this guide is not. This is not a best-in-slot guide. This is not a you have unlimited currency, what is the absolute best item that goes in every single slot to completely optimize and min-max the entire build. I think that's unrealistic and not very helpful for everyone. But this is also not a total casual guide. This is not a you just started your Deadeye, you don't know anything about the Ascendancy, you don't know anything about the abilities, and you don't have any currency, but you want to do the things that you have seen me do on stream or seen others do. It's not that guide either. This is a bit of a, try-hard gamer guide. This is an upper-level guide to Lightning Spear, itemization, and how to use it the best it can be used, without like the total min-max optimization that we see in some of the guides in the community. This is also not a totally comprehensive guide. I think covering everything about Lightning Spear would take hours and hours of video time, and I don't think most people need that type of guide. What I'm going to focus on is what I think are the most valuable things that I learned about the build that I did not know when I saw it on paper. And so I'm hoping that sharing that to you will allow you to optimize and understand your own approach to the build, and maybe pad on things here and there to improve your play and be able to do more content or to do it more efficiently. Alright, first thing we have to talk about is why Deadeye? Why not Amazon? We're using spears, and Amazon is very good with spears. I actually started as Amazon, but I switched to Deadeye. And the general reason why is that it is just better. Why is it better? So you'll notice the two main abilities that are in use for spears and that are crushing every single content the game has to offer are Lightning Spear and Wind Serpent's Fury. Both abilities make use of frenzy charges and become incredibly powerful with frenzy charges. So Lightning Spear splits and does more damage with frenzy charges, and Wind Serpent's Fury absolutely pops off with frenzy charges and per frenzy charge. In the Deadeye Ascendancy, we have Avidity, which says that when you would gain a frenzy charge, you instead gain max. This is crazy. When you look at Combat Frenzy and Profusion, adding a chance to gain one additional charge at 50% if you have, achieved these things. This applies to all the things you could achieve, and it's a 30% chance to gain maximum. You'll also notice over here, 5% chance that if you would gain a frenzy charge, you gain maximum. So we're actually at 35, which is really, really crazy. Over a third of the time, we're just gaining max when we only gain one. And our tree is such that max is 7. It's really, really powerful. The other equally powerful, maybe more powerful, is Thrilling Chase. Skills consuming, behave as if consuming twice as many. This is crazy. For every effect where you would consume 7, like in Wind Serpent's Fury, it's acting like it is consuming 14. Absolutely unbelievable. The other thing about Deadeye, which is always there, which is always powerful, is Tailwind and Windward. Tailwind gives us action speed, especially movement speed. Movement speed is a huge commodity in PoE 2, and it is hard to stack and hard to get fast, but we've got Tailwind. And then less damage taken per Tailwind is also really, really amazing mitigation. I mean, we already ride Aroa, we already stack evasion, we are already planning to hardly ever get hit, and so Tailwind is almost always on full uptime. So this is just another amazing thing about Deadeye that Amazon can't do. The last reason is that there is a unique item which allows us to achieve the crit chance power of Amazon, but with Deadeye, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Alright, as the first part of itemization, I want to talk about 4 no exception uniques. This means these are the 4 items that you can just plan to have slotted in on your build, so that if you're wondering how to itemize your character or optimize the itemization of your character, you just make these assumptions and kind of build around them. So let's go over the 4 as quickly as possible. The first one, as I mentioned, is TangleTongue. This allows us to get to max crit without the benefit of the crit overspill that the Amazon Ascendancy has, and we absolutely need max crit. We have to have it. There are 2 versions of recommendations for this item that I'll talk about. The first one is if you are poor. If you are poor, get a TangleTongue that has over 20% max crit. I've got a search that you can copy in the description, and when you paste it in, you'll get this window in the trade site, and you can see that you can get an over 20% crit chance with 20% quality and a socket for 2 divine. That is really, really cheap. We are post.g patch, so the currency inflation is here. 2 divine is not hard to come by. Also in this search, you can switch to what I would recommend to be the higher or better version overall, the more min-maxed version, which is a corruption that has the crit damage bonus enchant, and then the crit chance, you can kind of decide what to set it to. If you still want to get to max without really overspending in other areas, I would say you need like a 19.4, and you can see that's going to be about 25 divines. That's a 19.53. If we were to turn on the offline options, you see it comes down. Yep, there you go. So those are the 2 versions of TangleTongue that I would recommend, and you can search those with that trade search filter. The other thing I'll say about TangleTongue, which I didn't learn until like much later on, you'll notice it has crit chance listed twice. Why does it have crit chance listed twice? Well, TangleTongue has a chance to do a double crit. And I still don't fully understand how this works, but it shows up in the tooltip for your skills, and there's a way to kind of manipulate it into showing up in Path of Building. You'll see main hand effective chance for a twice critical hit. So once again, TangleTongue, really, really powerful. Even though it has the low flat fizz, it's got these crit chances that enable us to hit max crit and to have these double crits, and let us pivot off of Amazon into Deadeye and still deal all the critical stuff that we need to do. The second must-have, no exception unique, is Beacon of Azis, this amulet here. This is an absolute must-have because of the lowest affix critical hits ignore enemy monster elemental resistance. We crit all the time, so we just always ignore resists. This is really, really crazy. The more I understand PoE, the more I realize how crazy this is. This basically saves us endless investment on the passive tree into elemental resist mitigation, penetration type stuff. This solves pinnacle boss problems for us because pinnacle bosses have all sorts of incredibly high elemental resists and everything in between, and it does it all the time. We don't really have to do anything other than put it on. It also has some spirit on it, which does help us. I don't need the +2, so if you're looking at options on the trade site, the implicit rolls 10 to 15. I think a 10 is fine. I have 2 remaining spirit when everything is turned on and ready to go. And you can also balance that with the spirit enchant on your helmet, which I'll talk about later. There are 2 anoints that I would recommend for this, and you can kind of decide which one works for you, or you can filter in the trade site based on it. The one I have is called Storm Charged. Increased elemental damage if you've dealt a crit hit recently. Yep, that's really, really good. 20% increased crit chance. The other one is Overwhelming Strike, which is really basic. 20% crit chance, 20% crit bonus, a little bit more stun buildup, which could be kind of good on bosses. They're both really strong. I suppose in PoB you could evaluate which one really provides more DPS to you. This one has an upside and a downside. The upside is that if a lot of your flat damage from rings and your gloves is elemental, I think this is going to be more powerful. The downside is that if you're fighting, say, a pinnacle boss and you're going to just do 1 hit to try and kill him because you already have frenzy charges, well, you won't have dealt a crit hit recently. I always do spear pokes before I hit the critical bosses, or the pinnacle bosses, so not something to worry about. But those are the 2 enchants. Again, I'm going to have a link down in the description that you can paste into a browser to pull up this query in the trade site. And another thing that this link has is potential enchants that are good. So you can get all elemental resists, plus the level of all skills, or increased rarity. And since these have been corrupted in order to achieve these enchants, you're also looking for the anoints already being on the amulet, with people who corrupt them already have that. And so you can see, even with different enchants, you're looking at a pretty minimal investment, a few divines, to get an incredibly powerful build enabling unique amulet. The third no exception unique I'm going to cover is called the Deepest Tower. This is technically a tech choice that I have made, but if you're looking to just wipe away all content in the game, I do think this tech choice is the cheapest and in some cases the most effective way to delete pinnacle bosses. I have a whole video talking about this tech and I won't go too in depth on it, but basically the lowest affix there, enemies in your presence count on being on low life. That allows us to activate this wheel, which gives us an unbelievable amount of damage. It also allows us to use the execute gem wherever we want. That gives 50% more damage into whatever we slot it. So it's really, really good. It also adds chaos, which is not bad, and max life, and it has some ES on it, and it rolls a spirit enchant if you look for it. Once again, I've got a filter, which I'll include the description, which you can paste into a browser. It'll bring up this query here. These are showing the spirit enchant results only, which you maybe don't need, and that's why they're priced more. If we pull that enchant off and search for Deepest Tower, you can see it is dirt cheap just to throw this on and add it. And again, if you're not doing pinnacle bosses, or if you're not struggling with one-shotting pinnacle bosses, you could slot this off and go with a really dense ES circlet or something like that. But this is my no exception unique for this build. It helps solve any problems with the pinnacle bosses. Alright, the fourth and final no exception unique. There may be some debate on this, and feel free to offer comments in the chat if you disagree, but I consider Sacred Flame a no exception unique if you're trying to delete all content in the game. You'll see that first affix there, 57% of damage as extra fire damage, an unbelievable DPS boost by slotting this in. You also get 100 spirit or 110 with the socket. You also get, and it is definitely not something to just look over, a level 19 Purity of Fire, and the Purity of Fire is somewhat bugged. You can socket in gems that have an additional reservation spirit cost, like this cannibalism here, and it doesn't count the additional reservation for some reason. I don't see this in other scepters that I put on that have an ability that they add, only this one, and only this Purity of Fire, and at its base, Purity of Fire gives us 40 fire res. Sacred Flame is expensive, and that is why there's going to be maybe some debate, or has been some debate here and there, about why it is essential. Once again, I've got a copy pasta for you, and I'm sort of recommending, because there's a lot of variance to how much extra damage you get as fire. I slotted in at 55 to start my search, and you're going to see most of them are already corrupted for the cheapest ones, because those were people trying to high roll that corruption. But currently it's like a 25 divine investment. Definitely the most expensive single slot item in the build, and it's definitely not essential for doing a lot of the content in the game, including probably all mapping and map bosses. But if you're trying to repeat pinnacle content, I think it's essential. I will cover a fifth item, and this is sort of like an honorable mention. I do think you can wear a rare belt and you'll be just fine. But Ingenuity is technically best in slot for the belt because the bonuses are going to buff the flat damage, which is on your rings, and there's a very limited ability to increase flat damage with any build, and especially with this one because the TangleTongue base damage is very low. So yeah, I do think Ingenuity is best in slot. It's also very, very cheap. I don't know why you wouldn't use it. The link I'll give you flattens out these to 29 and 29, which is one off the highest base roll, which is 30. People are corrupting them and getting higher than 30 rolls, up to 37 per one slot, and then it's super, super expensive. But the overall benefit is not that significant. So you can spend 1 or 2 divines and get a really, really strong Ingenuity to slot into your belt. Okay, with the 5 uniques set in place, what comes next? What to do with the remaining slots? Before I go into details with each slot, I want to speak generally about what you should be looking for in terms of maxing out the benefit of what each slot can and cannot do. So the first thing you have to do, your 5 uniques are in, your skill tree is set, and you need to solve for stats. In my build, and based on refining this down to least capacity to do everything, you're going to need 205 dex for the level 20 skill gems. Let me make sure that's true. Let me fact check myself there. Yeah, 205 dex. You're going to need 149 int for Sacred Flame and 58 strength for Sacred Flame. 149, 58. In my build, I'm at 205, 150, and then 95, and that is just because I have this ring, and I probably could optimize that a little more, but doing just fine. Now, it's worth mentioning that you can swap an overstat of any of these numbers on your tree. This is especially true for the int and dex. I mean, if you're like 150 overstated on strength, you're just going to be wasting that. But with int and dex, if you're at like 230 dex, you can come into your tree and swap out all the dex nodes or whatever it is and fix things up. So, summary here on rings, gloves, and boots, we are probably going to need stats in order to achieve these numbers. Second thing you need to pay attention to with your remaining slots is flat damage. Again, as I mentioned with TangleTongue, the base physical damage can only go so high, and it is quite low compared to a rare spear. So you've got to find other sources of damage on your other gear. We call this flat damage, or I think PoE calls this flat damage. Ideally, your rings are going to have what we call triple flat. Double flat is required, and you've got to have it. I think on both of mine, I just have double flat, and it's just fine. And then ideally, your gloves are going to have triple flat, which looks like this. And then lastly is resists. In my opinion, resists do come last. The best defense in PoE 2 is deleting things and deleting them quickly, but you still want to be able to survive residual damage that you take otherwise. Other than the chaos res on the deepest tower, you don't get anything else from these uniques, so all your res is going to have to come from chest, rings, gloves, and boots, starting with the chest. And then also note that, like I said earlier, Sacred Flame does give Purity of Fire, so you get a head start there. Alright, let's jump into the specific slots. First slot to start with, and if my character was naked and I had no gear and I was going out there to figure out what to do after the uniques are in, I would start with chest. There's a couple of things that you need to look at big picture with the chest piece that you take. And I'll point out that mine is not very good, not very expensive, and the build works fine. So I don't necessarily think you need to shell out for your chest, but it is kind of the basis of your defensive stats. So it's important to know what's important about the chest piece. First thing is, most people use Falconer's Jacket, and that's because you get the implicit 5% movement speed. Movement speed is a commodity in PoE 2. It doesn't come easy. We can get some here. That's why we take it. I also would say movement speed is a very defensive mod in PoE 2, even in things as simple as boss fights, so don't overlook that, but you don't necessarily have to have a Falconer's Jacket. What you do have to have is strong, flat evasion and energy shield on the armor itself. The filter I provided is going to set these at 1100 and 380, but feel free to bump them up to look for something even better. Mine's 1107 and 430. I'm a big potato, so I haven't volved this to see if I can get a third socket. I'm afraid to, or I just haven't gotten around to it, but that's something else you could do. The last thing I'll say is that after that, you just want to get as many resists as you can squeeze in. Again, I'm going to provide a filter in the description, and that's going to have a Falconer's with 1100, 380, and 2 resists checked. But you could bump it up to 3, or you could bump the numbers around, do whatever you want over here in this slot. Feel free to turn off the Falconer's implicit, kind of mess around with the filter, and get the cheapest thing that works the best for you. Second slot to go with is the gloves. Here we have to have triple flat and then try to get stats or resists or both. Rarity is always cool. I've got a filter here that's going to show you a triple flat, 1 option on a stat, and 1 resist. You can see these are really cheap as it is, so feel free to play around with the filter over here. You could up the flats to get higher tiers required. You could, flex the amount of stats that you want higher or lower. Same thing with the resists. Note that over here where you see these P7, P9, whatever, this is the tier of the flat roll of that type. So this is a tier 9, which in PO1 speak is tier 1, the best possibility on a cold flat roll. There's obviously a range even within the tier, but for the sake of a quick look, if you see like 9, 8, 9, that's really good. But if you see like down here at tier 4, that one is not very strong. It still fits the filter that I've set, but it's not that great. And you could take a look. You could say, what does tier 9 cold look like? And then pop in, I want my cold to be 24. And then I think you have to put it in the middle, but 24 should work. Same thing with fire, tier 9 fire, 29, and we put that in there. So now we're seeing tier 1 fire, tier 1 cold, or tier 9 fire, tier 9 cold, and do that with each to improve it, and you can see the price is steadily going up. So that is to say, manipulate this, get as much flat as you can, as much resist and stat as you can, and you'll be good to go on gloves. The next item is rings. I would say rings are the trickiest in terms of squeezing out the value versus the cost. The cost of rings can go up tremendously as you start trying to squeeze out more value for them. The other thing I'll say is that mine are not that great. There's a tier 7, tier 8 flat with a little bit of rarity and kind of some crappy resist and some intelligence, and I think I crafted this. This other one, kind of the same thing. It's even got a dead mod, a couple of resists, and you know, this adds me up to like being pretty set on resist. I don't know why my fire is low. Purity fire or something is not running, maybe in town. But normally I'm res capped and pretty good defensively. So after that, again, like with the gloves, you focus on getting as much flat damage and as much stats and resist as you can in any combination. I've got a filter here that's going to show you a double flat ring with one stat and a variety of resist options. Kind of show you this filter here. So again, you could change this to triple flat and get new results. You could add things on like rarity as required fields. You could raise and lower the tier of the flats. And then the resist here I have in tons of combination. This filter has chaos as required. You could turn that off based on how much you're willing to spend. And yeah, these can get super costly. I mean, hundreds of divines, and they can be really cheap, like Exalt level costs, or even just like 1 or 2 divines for something really solid. And you can slot these in. Next, we're going to talk about boots. I would do these last, and I think they are the most flexible. I mean, rings technically, because of the variety and variance of stats, but rings are expensive. Boots are ubiquitous and flexible. They are cheap, and they're a nice way to patch in the holes that are remaining in your build without any downsides, because you don't get any damage from your boots. So, yeah, a little intro on boots. Remember that speed equals defense, so 35 move speed is required. Don't settle. Don't go for 30 because it's cheaper with other mods. Speed is defense, especially in this build. You want to leverage that boots are a good source of energy shield and or evasion, so a flat ES boot is going to be really strong. An ES plus evasion boot with pretty good ES is going to be strong. Yeah, and from there you just kind of fill in what you don't need. Broadly you can look for just like a strong pair of boots, because with the sockets being available for stats or resists, you can kind of fill in holes in your builds with the sockets on all your items and just buy a generally good pair of boots. So like I said, boots are most flexible. So this trade filter here is going to give you a filter for boots where the boots have no armor as required. So armor is 0. This guarantees you're getting ES or ES evasion or flat evasion boots. And you can kind of pick and choose from there based on price. It's got 35 move speed required, a stat, and a resist. You can also get some rarity on your boots if you're valuing rarity. Yeah, and just mess around with all the filters over here and find exactly what you need. Alright, the last specific slot we'll cover is jewels. Now, with jewels, there's a lot of different approaches, and not any particular approach is going to make or break your entire build. For the most part, I think of jewels as a way to increase the things that you're already doing, and if you want to spend a lot, you can increase them dramatically. If you want to spend a little bit, you can increase them, I don't want to say like in insignificant ways, but like kind of middle range. So like middle range increases are going to cost almost nothing, and then really strong increases are going to cost a lot. And that's just kind of how it is with jewels, it seems like, every season so far. So the first thing I'll talk about is the from nothing jewels. So if you don't know, the from nothing jewels allow you to allocate the passives around a keystone skill. So the keystones are these really large ones that you see scattered throughout the map. And then if you get a from nothing jewel that allows you to allocate passives in radius of a keystone, you can do it without connecting to your tree. The net result is either that you get skills that you totally can't get to on your tree, or like in this case, you are saving allocations and getting the skills that you really, really want. So for me, my from nothing is allocating around Dance with Death, and that is because I consider acceleration extremely important, absolutely critical. Again, we're taking every single movement speed no matter what, and the skill speed just kind of accounts for all the other things that you're doing. It helps that it is around the spear wheel, but for our build, the spear wheel is honestly kind of bait. It's not really that good. You're getting a 25 here, you're getting a 25 here. That's not that strong. Down here, you're getting a 12 crit chance, also not that strong. I would not come down here and get them if I did not have the Dance with Death from nothing. There are other options in this this from nothing slot. Because we are doing low life tech, you can get the from nothing that allows you to allocate right here. So this would be the unwavering stance one. And you can get finality, 120% damage, and then these two small passes, which are 30 and 30. Again, those are stronger than the spear wheel over here. Of course, it's low life only, but the only damage help you need is bosses, right? And then you could even get the Zealot's Oath from nothing, which will allow you to allocate 25, 25, 25. If you have more leftover points, you could do 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. So yeah, a lot of potential power there. That is from nothing. Moving on from that, the next expensive but very powerful is the Time Lost Emerald. If you're not familiar with these jewels, these are found in Sekimas, and basically you slot them in. Depending on the radius, it gives added buffs to the notables and small passives in radius. It also has an affix which can increase the effect of notables and small passives in radius, and both are good. My filter will allow you to toggle between all of them. This one I have is a large radius. Large is the only one that's going to let you get out here to Fervor, and it adds crit chance and crit bonus plus projectile damage for all of these nodes that we have allocated here. Again, the Time Lost has a lot of variety. The really cheap ones can be like 5, 7 divines, but if you start adding in different stats, if you start requiring that the radius is large rather than small, they'll get more expensive. I think mine I spent like maybe 20 divines on or somewhere around there. So yeah, you'll just have to look and see. The last jewel is the Sapphires. I have 2 in, and they are both looking like this: crit chance, crit bonus, and presence AoE. Because we run Deepest Tower, our presence AoE is reduced by 50%. So these jewels help buff this back up, so that way the boss stays low life for longer. This is especially helpful for Arbiter, who kind of flies out of range of the low life and can avoid the one shot in certain cases, depending on the crit that you get. And yeah, this slot is also flexible. Crit chance, crit bonus, energy shield if you want to be a little bit tankier, maybe for mappings or something like that. Again, I'm experimenting with the presence radius. The link I have here has a count with some extras that might be good, like elemental damage or magnitude of shock. Slot this in and sort of pad the things that you want to experiment with, or spend a lot and get a totally GG one that has all of the affixes. The final section on itemization is just going to be some honorable mentions. 2 of these are the flasks, so it is worth mentioning in its own space that you want your mana flask to have the maximum % increase charges. The reason for this is the Ambrosia gem, which goes on Wind Serpent's Fury. I cover this in detail in my other video on improving your boss DPS, but basically the damage here is based upon the max number of charges you have on your mana flask. The other flask is also fantastic for survivability. Olroth's Resolve, it applies all 1100 recovery instantly. It adds the added recovery as guard, which is essentially more health. Really, really good flask, but it costs like 10 to 13 divs, so it's up to you. The other 2 honorable mentions are things that are just plain and simple not in my build, but I've seen them. There is an approach to Wind Serpent's Fury where you stack melee skills, so it is a melee gem, and I've got kind of like a screenshot that comprises some of the items I've seen in other builds. So a Hand of Wisdom in action with a lot of int stacking and a melee skills enchant can be, an incredible amount of damage. It's overkill in my opinion, but maybe for party play where the boss is even stronger, that could be useful. So that's an honorable mention. And the other is just melee skills in general. So if you are like trying to get the melee skill of Wind Serpent's Fury higher, you could run a Prism of Belief. with Wind Serpent's Fury skills. And you can try and acquire melee skills like anywhere else you could find them on your gear and buff the damage in that way. Okay, we finally have itemization out of the way. That was long-winded, but hopefully useful. We're going to go into a section now on the passive tree. I'm not going to go through like every single node I have and make an explanation. What I'm really going to do is just like go over the general things that are going on with the tree so you understand like which aspects of the character we're promoting through the tree, and then discuss where you can be flexible based on what you've done with itemization or what content you're trying to do in the game. So a general overview. The tree is really lockstep and really straightforward, and anybody running this build should probably have pretty close to the identical set of passives on the tree. We are taking every movement speed node, every frenzy charge node, damage buff nodes, so increase % damage nodes, and then crit nodes. That's it. It's these four. And then, depending on the content you're doing, you might have a small nod to energy shield and evasion. So if like you're doing only mapping, you might need some of this, or logbooks, you might need some of this. Don't forget, the best defense is speed and damage, or the speed of your damage. Haha. Okay, with that overview out of the way, I mean, that's what this tree does. That's it. Very straightforward. Now let's talk about flexibility. So if you don't have enough points, or if you're wondering where you can flex slots because you can't add up to the exact number of passives that you see on my tree or on another guide, here's some spaces where you can maneuver. If your TangleTongue has a really high base crit, you might be over 100%, and then you can nuke the crit chance nodes that are kind of scattered throughout the tree. So, this wheel up here, depending on whether you go up or down, you'll get crit chance or crit bonus. You can kind of dodge one side or the other. Down here again, there's crit chance versus crit bonus. Over here, crit chance versus crit bonus. Same thing up here, and then even on the spirit wheel, I've got a 12% crit chance. And you could bring those back if your TangleTongue has really high base crit. The next thing is, like I mentioned earlier, if you're mapping a lot as opposed to repeating boss content, you can slot in more ES nodes. There's two I want to talk about and mention specifically. First one is Spectral Ward, 1 max ES per 12 evasion on your body armor, and it has this train of 4 here. I have this on permanently. It's really, really powerful. Another is down here, Subterfuge Mask. So if you're not running Deepest Tower because you're mapping and most stuff is out of your presence anyway, you could spec this on with a true ES helmet, and it would be kind of insane. Okay, the Spear Wheel. It's not that great for Deadeye, surprisingly. You would think taking all of these Spear nodes is really, really powerful. It really isn't. The reason why is because like these small nodes, 10% increase, that's not very good. We're accustomed to like low life stuff where it's basically 3 to 1. So those are bait. And then like this one is conditional. These are attack speed, which we don't care about, and these are 25%, which I have because I've got this fancy jewel, but also not like crazy strong. We have accuracy over here. So yeah, this whole wheel is kind of bait. You might see it on a lot of trees, and if you're running my build or my approach, I really don't think you need it. And then just in general, note that attack speed on the tooltip is bait and misleading. So if you buff up your attack speed by some means, this DPS number is going to go up, but the only damage you really care about is the average damage per use. Not over time, but per toss. So don't get baited by attack speed nodes. Last thing to point out, sorry, Throat Seeker and Careful Assassin work together. So that is this notable here and this notable here. If you can't take both, I don't think you should take either. I thought that was worth mentioning. Okay, in this next rather short section, I'm going to cover 6 things that I want to point out about the skill gems in this build. Broadly speaking, I find that people I interact with aren't reading their skill gems very carefully. So in general, some things you want to pay attention to on your skill gems. Of course, read the text entirely. Make sure that it makes sense. Read the affixes entirely. Make sure they make sense. look at this base attack damage, which varies based on skill. And then also note that your skills have like multiple things they do. So, you know, Wind Serpent's Fury, you can read all of this, and that's great. But you've got the Thrust, which is the first hit. You've got the Serpent, which follows per Frenzy Charge at 199, Shockwave at 272. So, you know, looking at everything on the tooltip and making sure it makes total sense all the time for every build, that's like catch-all advice. Now, specifically what I want to call out with what I do, the first is Spear Stab. And this is just the basic, doesn't cost mana. You get a 6 link for free Spear Stab ability. This one right here. And I love this ability. So I bind it to my middle mouse. It's always available. And basically when I come up to a boss and he spawns, I poke him. And it does two things. It debuffs him and prepares him for the one-shot, but it also generates frenzy charges through the cast on crit with Sniper's Mark, which is supremely valuable. So yeah, make good use of Spear Stab and pay attention to these like neutral abilities in all the builds. It's pretty cool. One thing I do on Spear Stab is I add Lightning Infusion to try and proc Shock on the boss, and then I use Overcharge, which has increased magnitude of shock. So this kind of, you know, softens the boss up and gets ready for a big hit. The next one is another neutral ability called Spear Throw. I make use of this in two ways. One is when we hop on Roa, we no longer have a movement penalty for attacking while we are, you know, progressing. So what you can do is, you'll notice I have no tailwind up here. I can run around and hold down Spear Throw and generate tailwind with no penalty. So I'm getting faster and boosting my evasion while I'm just moving from place to place. And you can kind of like, you know, run for 5 seconds and then throw one and keep it at 10 because it goes away at the counter. So that's really useful. The other thing I use this for is I socket Culling Strike in it. This isn't always useful. I'd say it's mandatory against Arbiter, so you can call his second phase when he's down to basically 1 health. But it has some other use cases, which is kind of cool. Another thing to call about Spear Throw, because it does kind of have a downside, is that it consumes a Frenzy Charge if you have one. So if you're at 7 Frenzies and you're trying to maintain your Tailwind, you kind of have to decide, do I want to lose a Frenzy Charge right now to stay on max Tailwind? So just a little call out there. Next thing is Cast on Crit versus Combat Frenzy. So there's 2 mechanisms for generating Frenzy Charges in this build. The first is a Cast on Crit with a Sniper's Mark. And so the next critical hit while the enemy is marked will give you a Frenzy Charge and deal extra damage. And I socket some nice support gems that make it proc more often and for cheaper. And then the other is Combat Frenzy. So when you freeze, electrocute, or pin an enemy, you get a Frenzy Charge. In general, you can think of it this way. You can use both for all content if you have the spirit for it. If you're, you know, starved for spirit, or if you want to, for repeat bosses, swap something out. You can take Combat Frenzy out because this doesn't proc on bosses for the most part, and just use Cast on Crit for the boss repeats. Next mention is Fork on Lightning Spear. Someone feel free to tell me in the comments that I'm wrong, but my eye test on using Fork and Lightning Spear is that it is incredibly powerful. I don't always see it in there in all the builds that I kind of look at, and that's probably for 2 reasons. If you look at TangleTongue, it already says that it forks critical hits. And then if you look at Lightning Spear, it says it splits towards 3 targets when consuming a Frenzy Charge. What I have heard people say is that the fork applies to the 3 split arrows. So the first one does not fork because of this, but the 3 that go out can do additional forks because of this. And when I'm deleting large packs of monsters, especially in Expedition logbooks, I see this ability forking all over the place. When I remove it, I don't see that. So I've heard a lot of discussion about it. It passes my eye test with flying colors. I highly recommend it. I already mentioned these 2, but I'll mention them again. If you're running the Deepest Tower, your huge low life gem that you can move around is called Execute. Gives you 50% more, which is massive. And you can bump that into anything where you need it. And then you have the Purity of Fire hack from Sacred Flame. Take a look at any Spirit increasing reservation gem, and you can sock it into Purity of Fire for free. Okay, the final section in this absolutely exhaustive potato video is gameplay tips. I don't have a lot. The gameplay is really simple, but as I mentioned earlier, when you're building a new build, read your skills. Read them very carefully. Read your support gems. Read them very carefully. It will pay dividends when you understand the way things actually work. Now, Lightning Spear, most powerful attack-based ability in PoE 2 so far by far. Again, it works off of frenzy charges. It also works off of something called Vault, which if you don't know, it charges up as you move. So again, we want max movement speed for this reason. You see my Vault here is 6 because I just threw one. We move again, we get it to 30, which is max, and we throw again. So broadly speaking, you don't want to be like repeat firing with no Volt. You want to throw, charge Volt, throw, charge Volt, throw. A lot of people don't know that. Again, we use Fork, passes the eye test. And then Wind Serpent's Fury. This is a melee ability. It does not work without frenzy charges. You're not even allowed to use it. And you'll notice the difference when you use it with max charges versus like 3 charges. Each charge is a like 200% multiplier on Deadeye. And then it does point this out, but when your target is up against a wall, it has a major damage increase. It says on the tooltip, knocking an enemy into terrain or another larger enemy will cause a shockwave. So if they're up against a wall, you get a 272 bonus per serpent, and you can have 14 serpents. So that's just like unbelievable. The math is probably mind-boggling, but you'll see it in the eye test. Last thing I want to point out is Infernal Cry. I kind of learned this through the comments and interactions on my previous video. So when we're bossing, we do an Infernal Cry before one-shotting, which gives a huge, huge buff to our damage. And one thing to note about Infernal Cry is that it buffs your damage per 5 power of enemies in range, and unique monsters always have 20 power. But the point is here that the enemies have to be in your range, which I assume that means in your presence, or maybe in this Warcry radius, perhaps. I'm not sure which one. But one thing I see sometimes is that people are doing Warcry as like a pre-spawn buff. So like your boss is coming in, you're like, I'll go ahead and Warcry now, and then boss spawns. Well, that is not giving you the buff. You have to wait until the boss is present, and then when you Warcry with the boss present and it works, you'll notice the boss gets kind of like a little orange flame around the center of their target. That indicates that it has gone off and actually procced. Alright everyone, that about wraps up what I had hoped to share about this build. I hope it was useful. Remember, this is perhaps the most powerful attack-based build we will ever have in PoE 2. It is completely broken, so enjoy it while we still have it. Oh my God. Lightning Spear and Wind Serpent's Fury are a blast. Have fun with them. The itemization is flexible. It can be expensive, but it also can be cheap and still capable of deleting everything in the game. Also, don't forget, I'm a big potato, so don't listen to anything I say. Trust the Shiba, and you'll be okay. Adios, everyone.